I'm delighted to be able to give you my thoughts on the sustainable management of large rivers and streams. I'm a teacher, a researcher in ecology and restoration ecology. I work at the École nationale du génie de l'eau et l'environnement in Strasbourg, and I work also with a lab in Strasbourg. So the first question that was asked to us is to talk about our professional training and our research activities that we work on. So I started with a very strong interest in preserving biodiversity, looking at questions about long-term issues, and that naturally led me to training in biology, plants, environment, and ecological engineering, and I had my master's internship on the rehabilitation of anthropized sites. And then I also studied environmental law. I did my PhD in the restoration ecology of large rivers, looking at the dynamic of the biological communities in the context of restoration. So this was mostly on the Vieux Rhine, the old Rhine River in France. So we carried out restoration actions with gravel augmentation and controlled bank erosion. So to this, we carried out analyses and experiments on biological invasive species. So the idea was to then, my passion became my business, and so I wanted to be able to transfer, exchange, share, and build knowledge. And in order to do this, I did an ATER, teaching at the university, with the teaching that was specialized and cross-cutting, with specialized in biostatistics, ecological engineering, community and landscape ecology, and spatial analyses. I did a postdoctorate work with teams in Germany, and I'll come back to this later on. We looked at the evaluation of ecological engineering projects. All of these, this experience allows me now to carry out the missions that I've been assigned, teaching and research activities. So for the research topics, I worked on the restoration and ecological engineering, with the evaluation of restoration through concepts and tools, taking into account references, trajectories, in a context of global changes and dynamics, with the transformation of landscapes and the clear consideration of the historic biodiversity. With the environmental filters that are presented here, the idea was that using the dispersion filter, this would be clear in a physical environment, and then acting and on the confounding effects and the interspecific interactions. So the relations that can be made between local fauna and flora and the possible exotic or invasive species that can create interactions, new interactions in the current panorama. And if I come back to this topic, these are factors that can interact with the effects and benefits. That's why we need to study these interspecific interactions. Lastly, we need to look at the reconciliation between humans and their environment to try to preserve biodiversity at different scales of impact that have an impact on the conservation of biodiversity, and particular aquatic biodiversity. So I worked on the Upper Rhine, which is at the border between France and Germany. I carried out different projects with ecological engineering, ecological restoration. Here Alsace with partners that are represented in red. And then we did monitoring of quality in the environment, quality and bioindication, and then we studied socio-ecosystems and trajectories. So we studied the Rhine and the Danube to work on the coevolution between linear infrastructures and the alluvial forest. Then we wanted to move away from the large rivers and look at the upstream rivers. And in particular, we studied hydraulic constraints on macroinvertebrates. At the European scale, we wanted to come back to the large rivers through projects with a larger coverage. And we're starting this project soon. We're working on different rivers. We're going to collect data and do meta-analyses to study the influence of river infrastructures on biodiversity, in particular aquatic and riparian biodiversity. So the next stage was to analyze the activities and to bring this into perspective with the different drivers. So the first analysis is that I was quickly integrated into multidisciplinary structures. To begin with, it was a lab with three main topics: image as a tool for analysis and communication, city to take into account the socio-ecosystem, and environment to integrate societal approaches, and ecology, so this eco-sociological approach to find a balance between humans and the environment. The second structure is the ENGEES. So three topics, two in the top in its title: water as a resource, and all of the disciplines around water are taught in the school. The environment, focusing on eco-sociological approaches with ecological transition that we're all moving towards, and action. So the research topic is in labs in the school, and also with the operational mission of applied research to create actions. And this is why we feel strongly about working on research and action to be sustainable and to make sure that all of the actions we carry out are sustainable. Another element is force of innovation. The fact that we've been able to learn and become to use tools independently that come from geography or from mathematics made it possible for me to answer questions concerning post-restoration benefits and to work on configuration, composition, and interfaces to create assessment indicators and to produce graphics and visuals that are quantified. So we work in a very descriptive manner. We're analyzing the transition before and after with dates, that the disturbances that have been caused by the restoration with the different analyses. So I also want to talk about the contribution of cross-border collaborations that made it possible for us to work on the Interconnect project, where we want to analyze the relationship between river infrastructures and biodiversity on the Rhine River and also the Danube, to be able to work on decision aid documents, technical documents, to have a cross-border vision, so that the practices and the measures that are planned are relevant to the banks that we're on. So in interviews, we spoke to people on the French side and on the German side, and we perceive that the measures taken at, for instance, the German management is really focused on the forests and And on the French side, we're more focused on the hydraulic management of the river and the length of the river. There's a real differentiation. So we also have what we can call poolable results that can be shared. So we can share all of our learnings. This is something that we set up after the different programs that I was involved with, to be able to work at different scales in different environments and to have shareable approaches. I'll give you an example. So the objective was to restore the mosaic of habitats on the Rhine that was a very highly developed river. And we wanted to diversify the mosaic. And as a headwater river, we wanted to study the effect also. The objective was the same, to restore the mosaic of habitats, and the results were shared. So we see elements that are similar and that are shared by both environments. The habitats and the environments were not identical, of course. There was more sediment in the unrestored rivers. So we saw that we could improve the substrate in the headwater rivers and increase the number of species that were attracted by the substrate other than sand. So we wanted to shed light on the different types of species and explain their possible absence. So we wanted to integrate the similarity between scales of analysis and action. So we wanted to also understand what sustainability means, consider the strong territorial anchoring of rivers and streams, promote partnership research for research and actions, and to favor the transfer of information between actors. Also to learn more about river management practices of neighboring countries. I'll conclude with the challenges for the future and evolution for water professions. So we're really looking at the evolution of challenges. In a recent article that was published in 2021, we see that there's an evolution of challenges according to the ecosystemic services that are required. We look at regulation services, this is still the case. Supply, cultural services then appeared, and then support services, support to habitat, environmental restoration. That comes later on. We see that there's an evolution depending on the regulatory framework, which itself has evolved. If we look at the main challenges and the themes that we're working on, we're looking at infrastructure. We saw this again recently in an article by Barbara Belletti. We see that there are still barriers in 36 European countries. With the hydraulic blockages on the river that leads to the loss of habitat. And this is puts pressure and has impacts. We look at challenges and evolution. At the institute that I work in, the future engineers are trained in risk prevention with the global changes that are taking place, and we can look at constraints and modeling for the future. Management of invasive alien species. We saw that invasive species enter into competition, but they can also trigger facilitation processes. They'll make it possible to facilitate the presence of some species other than invasive species and create a new community that is either monospecific or comprised of the invasive species. The Rhone is concerned. There's an article that was published very recently on Asian knotweed. And I saw that we're working on other little known plants that proliferate along our rivers. There's also the question of biofueling, waste and pollution management with plastic in the river, industrial discharge in the river, and then focus on the assessment tools and ecological restoration and on riparian vegetation. So we need to take in this riparian vegetation into account in the work that we're doing. And it consists in assessing the activity on the banks of rivers and its ability to provide ecosystemic services and the rules and the functions that are attributed to it. So we want to train our coming future generations with an integrative view and a socio-ecological approach to rivers. And I'll finish with this quote: interdisciplinarity is an important element, with this beautiful picture of the Rhine River in 1810 with the meanders that we've lost over time. So thank you, and I'm available for questions.